They've been referred to as ex-cons, felons, sometimes ex-offenders. And these days, you may often hear the term returning citizen. Men and women who've served their time and are eager for a second chance. But second chances don't always come easy. Many discover it's hard to shake off the stigma of the time spent behind bars, finding it difficult to locate housing or get a job. Some may even find that although they've paid their debt to society, they're in some ways still doing time. Hi, I'm Anqoinette Crosby and welcome to Vocal Point. Did you know that the United States has more people locked up than any other country? More than a staggering 2 million people. Many in the criminal justice field blame increasing drug convictions and a new influx of federal laws. So what happens when these returning citizens, nearly 700,000 each year, come back home? How difficult is it for them to start over and make a new life for themselves? A life more appealing than going back to prison. We'll address those questions and others with our panel in just a moment. She's a professor in the Criminal Justice Department at the University of the District of Columbia. Tony Lewis is a community activist and founder of Sons of Life, an organization that assists children of incarcerated parents. Gail Arnall is the executive director of the nonprofit OAR, Offender Aid and Restoration. Also with us today is Theresa Hodge, a reentry life coach and co-founder of Mission Launch, Inc. Theresa completed a 70-month federal prison sentence for a white-collar case. And Ryan Reiskamp, he is a businessman and works with Theresa at Mission Launch, Inc. He too returned from prison after serving 3 years. Welcome to you all. Theresa, let's start with you. You know firsthand what it's like as an ex-offender to come back into the community. Talk about your experience and some of the challenges that you have faced.
Okay. What I refer to it as the invisible life sentence. When I went to prison, what I didn't anticipate was coming home was going to be the difficult part, and it is. For me, being referred to as an ex-offender and feeling like I have to carry that label for the rest of my life is an unbearable cross, in a sense, to have to bear. Beyond that, I can give you a very personal experience. I remember I was applying for a job online, and it was a job where I had an opportunity to work from my own home using my computer and my internet to work for someone. And I was very qualified for the job. I was going through the application process, and they asked for my name, my address, and very basic information. And then the question popped up, have you ever been convicted of a crime? And I checked the box, yes. Well, what popped up next was, you are no longer qualified for this job.
So automatically that came up.
Instantly, I was disqualified. What I knew was I wasn't disqualified because of my name or my address, but it had to be because of that one piece. In that moment for me, I made a conscious decision. I haven't applied for a job since, because I realized I did not have the emotional courage after coming home from prison to have to go through that process. Fortunately for me, I come from a family with great support. My daughter and I, we had made a decision that we were going to start a business. So in that moment, I made a conscious decision to really buckle down and focus on building my own organization for returning citizens.
Ryan, are you facing those same challenges as well?
I actually have a similar story. I came home and decided that it was going to be very hard for me to go through a corporate position, check the boxes, things like that. So I searched for Craigslist and tried to apply some of the skill set that I had enhanced while I was in prison, but also had worked on in my previous business before prison. And so I reached out to someone who had a small company, who obviously didn't have an HR department, and I basically landed the job over the phone, and she said, and I'm going to want to check your background. I said, that's no problem, you're going to find this. I have a conspiracy to distribute marijuana, federal charge, conviction, and we had an honest and open conversation, but in the end, she decided that it wasn't in her best interest. And I think what we can take away from that, or what I took away from it, is that this is an emotional thing for people. You know, they really have there's a stigma attached to it, and if we want to move forward in it, we really have to address that going forward and try to appeal to people's sense of sympathy, because being labeled an ex-offender for the rest of your life is a terrible, future ahead of us.
Dr. Dortch, he's saying that people need to have compassion and sympathy. You talk to maybe victims of crime, and they may find it a little bit tougher to find that sympathetic ear. Why is changing a term from ex-offender, ex-convict to returning citizen so important?
Because actually the term, in the age of Twitter, it's difficult to know where the term returning citizen became attached to people who used to be called ex-offenders. However, we do know that that term is used in immigration policy when people hold dual citizenship, or when they're expats. They want to be able to come back home and regain full citizenship. And that's what we need to be concentrating on, is whether or not the ex-offender regains full citizenship. And we can talk about how he has lost some of his citizenship rights further on in the program.
Gail, is that what your organization does, is help people, give them a second chance?
We do, and we depend on the support of the community to help in that regard, but it's very difficult. And the stories are just really astounding at how hard folks coming home from incarceration work to regain their stability, their sense of who they are, and then they see that box. And I know DC has removed the box from the DC government application.
And your work is in Virginia.
And we're working in Virginia, and Alexandria and Arlington County have removed the box. But it's more than that. It's really helping employers understand that there are just enormously qualified people, and they're missing out on hiring these people.
Tony, let's talk about some of your background and some of the work that you're doing. You have a tattoo on your arm, like father, like son. Talk about your upbringing and what has brought you to the work that you're doing now with ex-offenders.
Right. Well, my father, I'm Tony Lewis Jr. He's Tony Lewis, convicted alleged drug kingpin from Washington, D.C. So it throws people sometimes when they see my tattoo that says like father, like son. But at the end of the day, it's more about him being a drug dealer was a decision he made, but that's not who he is. It's not all that he is. So I'm reflective of the good things that he is, right? And my compassion and my motivation to help others, I got that from him. And so it's kind of that's kind of the background on the tattoo. And so I'm coming from a community, impoverished community here in D.C., where incarceration was kind of a rites of passage and a part of life. I was able to navigate through that, and now I'm here as a representation of what's good from communities like mine, and helping people get back on their feet, and also mentoring kids that have incarcerated parents to try to be a guide or a map for them, and to show them that you don't have to follow in those footsteps. And also that your parent may have made a bad decision, but that doesn't necessarily make your parent a bad person. And I think we want to share that same kind of mindset for returning citizens. People made bad decisions, they paid their debt, and so they're back in society trying to redeem themselves. And I think they should be given that opportunity.
How many, is it the majority, or is it half? How many are actually making that effort to come back and to be a productive member of society?
I mean, I would venture to say it's hard, but I think most people,
Really?
most people,
By far the majority.
yeah, absolutely. It's what happens is how fast can that happen. It's about the emotional and psychological barriers and trauma that they spoke about when you apply, you know you're qualified and nobody letting you in. And then, especially if you're a parent, right, and you have children that have needs and you've been away from them for 5-10 years and you want to come home and start to positively impact their lives, and the pressure of life starts to get to you. It's not a justification to reoffend, but my point is I think we could get more success if we could get a faster intervention with people coming home from prison.
So should the intervention, though, start when they're out or while they're in prison?
Well, I think pre-release, for me, pre-release would be awesome. I know here in the District of Columbia, the challenge is that all of our inmates do time in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, so it's kind of hard to get a uniform training offering or intervention across the Bureau of Prisons, specifically for DC inmates. But I definitely think, and I've seen it happen through CSOSA and Office of Return and Citizen Affairs and other entities here in DC traveling to federal prisons in the Mid-Atlantic region to lease and doing teleconferences to make DC inmates aware of the options that await them. So I think that's a start.
Okay.
Well, and the research does say you really have to start on the inside.
Sure.
Talk to folks about criminal thinking, about having some self-reflection of what happened, to put them where they are. Start that in the pre-release and continue it with some of the same people on post-release. That's what the research says. So I would say to DC, and I'm a DC resident, figure it out. The research says if we really are serious about helping people get back on their feet, we need to take care of this problem. And the fact that a good number are in North Carolina, fix that. Don't let that keep from doing what we need to have done.
She's speaking of Rivers Correctional Institution, right, in North Carolina, yeah.
So you can imagine there are people in the community feeling, why should we throw resources to these programs when there are people, hardworking people that don't have a record, that can't find jobs, can't find housing? How do you answer that? And what's been the pushback when you tell folks, this is my work, this is what I'm doing, is helping ex-offenders? Anybody can answer that. Ryan?
Yeah, I think if we limit someone based upon a label that's put upon them, I mean, that essentially is what's wrong with our country today, and what the boiling point is about racism. Why affirmative action was put into place was because it's unfair. If someone's qualified, then they should have a right to that position, and it's the company's benefit. It's a win-win situation, and it's just this idea that we have to continue to be punished.
How do companies...
And can I jump in? The question itself pits us against one another. And we don't have to be against one another, particularly as the economy, as we see so many baby boomers are going to retire. We need all the quality people we can get in the workforce. So it's also a public safety issue.
Okay.
You're spending the money anyway, $25,000 to $45,000 a year, just for room and board in the system, and that doesn't make any sense.
So you're saying if they reoffend and go back to prison, then it's
You've got the crime they committed, the victims, and this expense. That doesn't, and if they can't survive, if I can't survive, I'm going to do something because I am going to survive.
Okay.
I just think it's important to think of, it's not a handout, and I think that's what happens. We think it's about people that fall into the returning citizen category are talented, right? And so the people should just have the opportunity to pursue work, and that's at its core. It's about that. It's not, hey, you should give somebody coming home from prison a job. They just deserve the opportunity to get a job, and for many people, that opportunity, that window is not there. So.
Okay. Professor Dortch, you were talking about what your work is doing. It's more faith-based, and you said it's about Christian principles. Can you talk about that?
It's not necessarily my work, but we know that from a very young age, the age of 3, children have this idea of fairness, and so It's justice, fairness. I've done my time. That's what you asked me to do. I've done what you asked me to do, and now it's over. And now I need to regain my full citizenship.
If I can add to that, it's a value-based question as well. You know, America is the land of the second chance. People come here for a second chance. For those of us who made a mistake, went to prison, and paid the time for that particular crime, it's about giving us a second chance. And you're right, it's not about a handout. I just want to be able to have a relatively clear road like everyone else has, like I had once upon a time, to just live my life and pursue the American dream.
So do you think there should be a difference between those that commit white-collar crimes versus somebody who's committed a violent crime? Do you feel like you're in the same category, or do you want to be looked at differently?
No, I don't want to be looked at differently, not at all. I think that when the judicial system makes a decision as to what is the length of time that's required for that particular offense, that's it. And when a person comes home, they're just a person. The reality is no one is sitting in prison trying to figure out when they're going to go back to prison. And so if people are not trying to figure out when they're in prison, how they're going to come back, they're making amends, they're trying to atone, and they just want to move forward, and their value needs to be recognized again back in society.
There's also the issue of what's a violent offense, and our criminal justice system puts just a whole bunch of things in that category that you might think, well, that's not quite what I thought. So certainly if you murder somebody, but if you are in a bar fight and take a swing at somebody and hit them, that's a violent offense.
Right.
And all of a sudden you're a felon with a violent offense. Really?
Yeah.
We can do better.
And I think though across the board though, we're talking about redemption. We're talking about the judge saying, hey, you convicted of you. If the jury convicts you and you get sentenced, you do your time. I think what we need to start looking at people on a case-by-case basis, and sometimes, you know, how long ago crimes were, what were the particulars of the case, and if, in terms of hiring, if there's no rational relationship between the crime and the job, and the person is qualified, it shouldn't be any impediment to that person getting hired. And with the people just being excluded for being a felon, we don't even get to that. We don't get a chance to discuss the ins and outs of the case or who that person is today versus when they made that bad decision.
The EEOC, the Equal Opportunity Commission, has said that in their guidelines.
Sure.
They haven't gone that next step to say it's the law, but the guidelines are, if it's not related to the job,
Right.
you have no grounds for not hiring them.
Professor George, what would you like to see in terms of training ex-offenders?
In terms of training ex-offenders, we think about the GED program here and across the country, the GED program. That program has been changed a number of times since it was first created in 1945 and after World War II. But it was recently changed so that it would fit Common Core, and that has made GED more difficult for our returning citizens when they take it. And we would like to see more of a model that was developed by Washington State, which is career laddering. And career laddering is starting the person out in the direction of the career they would like to go in and teaching them from that space rather than theoretically or abstractly. And that's the model that we're trying to get here in the district. And they are slowly getting on board with that model.
Tony, what about housing discrimination?
I think obviously there's a need for housing. And I mean, even when you start talking about how gentrification has impacted the return to citizen community here in DC, where people are coming home and their family members no longer reside in the district, so people are being released to homeless shelters and this and that. So I think housing is a major issue, and because of the demand, the housing that is available fills up pretty quickly. So I think it needs to be a conjoined effort to address, but you can't address the housing issue without addressing the employment issue. I think they go hand in hand. Being a returning citizen can definitely stop people from living in certain communities, on certain properties, whether it's the housing authority or just privately owned real estate. People can exclude based on, criminal history. And again, I think it should be considered, right? But it shouldn't just be a blanket. And these things are taking a blanket approach. You have a felony, you can't live here. Like, no matter what it is, how long ago it was.
Right, and you're saying case by case.
It needs to be that.
Okay.
It needs to be that.
Theresa and Ryan, talk to me about the emotional side of things. I mean, Theresa, you being a mom and, being behind bars and having a daughter, how was that? And then, did you ever think that it would be this tough when you were released?
I definitely never thought it would be this tough. I thought I was envisioning life afterwards very differently. I am very fortunate in one sense. I raised my daughter, and she graduated from college on a Saturday, and my trial started on that Tuesday. I cannot imagine having, if I had to go to prison when she was a young person. I'm very grateful that she was older, mature, and we were able to work together. But one of the things I can say is individuals don't go to prison, their families go to prison. And when they come home, their families come home. But you don't come home the day you're released, you come home in waves. You're maybe physically released from prison, but a part of you is still in prison, and a part of you is starting to transition. And it's almost like a wave. I feel like I've come home in stages. When I was released from the halfway house, another part of me came home. When I was released from probation, I was wondering how I was going to feel. I cried. I cried for 10 minutes, uncontrollably, because a weight felt like it came off of me. And I still have a long road ahead of me. I have a strong support system, strong family, but I am not living the life that I once lived prior to incarceration, and I'm not living the life that I envisioned while I was in prison.
Did it destroy you financially?
Oh, absolutely. I lost everything. I lost my home. I used to live in Mitchellville, Maryland. I lost my home. I lost my automobile. I lost all of my belongings. There are things that I will never regain again. And when you look at the housing market and the prices of houses today, when I look at where I used to live and where I am today, and I'm not bitter about that. I'm hopeful. I enjoy what I do now, which is support and advocate for returning citizens, and I'm a mouthpiece because I feel like what happened to me only was allowed to happen because people were asleep at the wheel. I didn't care about returning citizens until I became one, and that's my truth.
Okay. Ryan, same question.
Well, I think the emotional side of things, like that tends to get addressed last. While you're incarcerated, you are given GED programs, you're given access to some training. Now my situation was from the federal system, so I feel like we probably got more of the money from the taxpayers than a state necessarily would, but you don't receive much in the way of emotional support. When you come home, that was by far one of the hardest things. I've never known anyone else close to me who went to prison, and some of the things that you're going through, pretty much everything, you cannot relate to a close family member who just hasn't been there, and they want to, and you can see the hurt in their eyes and how hard it is for them. But the fact of the matter is, if we had organizations, we had more organizations or more support for organizations like Mission Launch, I think that my reentry would have been a lot smoother. I came home and by chance, through a co-working space, found Theresa and Lauren and their organization Mission Launch, and Theresa became an emotional mentor for me as it pertained to trying to get out of that prison mentality, but also you think about it, like I was in for 3 years. That was my life. For 3 years, my family members had a different life. It's hard to relate.
Do you think your re-entry may be a little bit different than somebody of color?
I think that there's similarities, certainly with when you're just a piece of paper and when you're going for employment. I think that there's always going to be differences, no matter if it's person to person. I I think I could imagine, you know, and try to tell you that yes or no, but I think that the fact of the matter is that each person is going to be demoted no matter what. Wherever their standing was before, whether it was fair or not, they're going to be demoted because of the label that's put upon them.
Okay. Hold that thought. We're going to take a pause and listen to the stories of some individuals your organization helped. Gail, let's take a look.
Second chance means everything, just to have the opportunity to straighten myself out and be an example for my children. They love me dearly, and I love them absolutely to the utmost. I took them to their first basketball game. We got to see the defending champions play against our home team, and we won. And it was just an amazing experience, and that came after my incarceration. So it's a lot of things that happened since then that I feel like has made me a better father.
Chirp. Cute. Mm-hmm. That's what the grasshoppers say.
I wanted to do that. I wanted to do that. Me too.
Right now, the relationship I have with them is very part-time. I'm working 2 jobs, so, you know, right now that's taking up majority of my time. I'm excited for the future because I don't plan on going back to jail, but I plan on showing society and the world and my family, which is most important, that, you know, you can fall, you can make a mistake, you can come out and make a difference.
When I came back, I didn't know who I was. I self-medicated from the horrors of what I saw over there. It wasn't a pleasant picture. War is not a good thing. I pretty much was on a good path of life. I had an opportunity to go overseas and work as a contractor. I'm a trained network engineer. When I returned home, I had developed what's called PTSD. I drank, I'm not a big drinker, then I used narcotics. The narcotics caused me to steal and do whatever else by any means necessary to obtain the heroin. I was a heroin addict. I snorted heroin. And I got myself some petty charges. They're actually petty charges, but in the state of Virginia, $200 is a felony. And I obtained a nice little sentence in Fairfax County Detention Center. That's how I learned or got in touch with OAR. Once I got linked up with OAR and around such a positive environment, it made me want to go back to school. They really care. And initially when I went to OAR, they had a basic like communication class with, I think her name was Jenny. I need every bit of that communication because I was learning how to live all over again, how to interact with people. I started having some hope and living again. I really enjoyed school, and I'm thankful to be it, and I'm kind of proud of myself actually to be going back to school. That's huge for me.
Professor George, tell us about the work advocates are doing in this area.
Well, in December, Mayor Bowser formed a transition team. And the transition team spoke to the advocates. They allowed the advocates to stand up and be videotaped and audiotaped, and they took written testimony from us. And the advocates were very hopeful that with this amount of attention, videotaping and audio taping, that the recommendations that we gave, the corrective actions that we were suggesting would actually be acted upon. And we watched her go through her inauguration, and we didn't hear some of the things that we had proposed, and we waited, and we waited. Mm-hmm. And so UDC professors, both in the Criminal Justice Department and in the law school, decided that we would facilitate a conversation between the mayor's office and the advocates. And we had some skin in the game in that we wanted, the advocates wanted some data. They wanted to know how well the returning citizens were doing on several dimensions, and we can talk about that.
Okay, so what was the outcome of those conversations?
The outcome was that we were postponed. We got to talk with both the deputy city mayor and we got to talk with the councilman, but we were postponed. And even though UDC had made a good faith effort to have to arrange the conversation between the advocates and the legislators.
So what did you want to happen?
We wanted several things. The people at UDC, we graduate between 40 and 50 criminal justice seniors every year. And so each of those seniors have to have a senior paper. And the only way that and it's a research paper, and the only way that they can write that research paper is if they have data. And the data was being withheld. And the district has said that it will be transparent about the outcomes of the returning citizens. And so when we're graduating that large number of criminal justice students, we needed the data as much as the advocates needed the data.
But do you think it's a good effort that DC does have a returning citizens affairs office? Is that a good first step?
I think that the services food stamps come from Human Services, housing comes from the Housing Authority. I think that GEDs come from OSSI. So each one of the services that they need come from one of the departments that are in the city. And that's what we were trying to get the mayor and the city council to. All of those offices signed an MOU saying that they would provide information, that they would compile the data, and they would generate reports on our returning citizens. But that didn't happen.
What's happening in Virginia?
Well, in a number of things, Virginia is still behind the times in terms of getting people the right to vote when they are released. It's better than it was. 3 years ago, the governor signed an executive order to give folks an easier time to get their voting rights, but that's not as good as we need it. But let me tell you, the thing that concerns me, and this is true of all the states, is in our criminal justice system, we're putting too many people behind the bars for too long. And so you look at the system and you think, why is that? What's going on? Who has the power in the system? And it's the prosecutor. Mm-hmm. It's not the judges. We had mandatory sentencing. Now, because of the Supreme Court ruling, it's guidelines, but the judges are still going with the guidelines. Mm-hmm. So prosecutors decide, are they going to prosecute? How many counts are they going to prosecute? And then they come and say, well, if you go to trial, it'll be, you may get 20 years, I'll give you 3 years.
Sure.
And you got to think hard about that you're probably going to take the 3 years. Less than 5% of the people in prison had a trial.
Mm-hmm. Nonviolent drug offenders as well. I mean, that's been spiked. I mean, since 1980, the incarceration rate, we talk about the 2 million in the opening, 2 million people being incarcerated. Many of them, especially in the federal system, are nonviolent drug offenders. And so you got to think about that and getting, I think about my dad's situation, right? I mean, people can say what they want. He was a drug king. We got convicted of a nonviolent drug offense, first-time offender, and he's been in prison since 1989.
A life sentence?
Life sentence, life without parole. And I've had to deal with that, like grow up in that situation. And I don't think we're not unique. It's thousands of people across this country that fall into that same category. He never went to prison before that. And so you got to think about that. And, murderers or rapists or whomever, it's not a judgment on anybody, but I'm saying they get a second chance. But nonviolent drug offenders, especially African-American and Latino men, have been affected by these mandatory minimums and things like that. So that's what's driven the prison system up in an insane rate. So.
Do you think new marijuana laws will make a change, will change that?
Well, I mean, I think, let me say this. Yes and no. On one end, yes, it's illegal, so people won't get arrested for marijuana. I think especially here in the District of Columbia, though, I think, first of all, if that's the case, then I feel you should repeal convictions for marijuana in the past. If you really want to make a pitch, or you really want to impact the people that's been, victimized by, if you want to say, overly prosecuting African Americans for marijuana usage, right? But on the back end, I think if it's going to be marijuana, it's not people, I know some people go to prison for marijuana, but people are not getting life sentences for marijuana. You have to attack the draconian laws around crack, around cocaine, all drugs really. I mean, I'm not saying people shouldn't go to prison, that's the other thing. In the advocacy, I think it get lost that people, yes, if you break the law, if you sell drugs, you should go to prison. We're just saying you shouldn't go to prison forever. You shouldn't go to prison for these extremely long times and you can't, when you come home, you're 20, 30 years removed from everything, and it's so difficult to get your traction. That's all that's what I'm saying.
So again, not putting everybody, lumping every ex-offender
Case by
in the
case
same
basis.
category.
Right.
Gail, where does your passion come from?
I love the fact that people can reinvent themselves, and that there is a instinct in our being, in our DNA, that says I can do something differently. And most of us, maybe all, have had help to do that. We've, as children, got help. As teens, we got help. As graduates of high school, so that the ability to say to a human being, come on in, let's be on the journey with you, and let's get you where you want to go. So let's start with that. Where do you want to go? I love the idea that the career path.
Sure.
And by the way, it's called strength-based case management. You don't say, oh, bless your heart, you have all these problems. You say, what do you want to do?
Sure.
Let's get you to that. And I just think the human spirit is worth preserving and encouraging.
What about pushback from victims' rights organizations?
You know, they absolutely have to be at the table. And our justice system doesn't have them at the table. So I rob you, you are horrified, you've been violated, I go to jail, you have no role from then on. You may be called to testify, but probably not, because I'm going to plead it out. So you're sitting over here thinking, where do I get justice? I don't get anything. And so the restorative justice model, and that's a real word, and there's a real model that says, to the extent we can, that the parties are willing, let's have some connection. So there can be some request for forgiveness, and at least the possibility of forgiveness, so that you're free, that you're not 10 years from now afraid to go to your home.
Right.
So that is my
Theresa,
hope.
do you find that it's more difficult for women who are ex-offenders coming back into the community? Is there a difference between men and women?
I think that our challenges are the same. Often, however, women are single moms, and they're responsible instantly for their children. I think, too, men do a better job compartmentalizing some of their emotions, and women are often just devastated by going to prison. And as Ryan mentioned, they're not good and great places that you can go and share. Someone once said, well, did you go get, psychological help since you've been home? Our psychological, our, what we feel about PTSD and so forth, what I don't want is another label. I don't want to navigate through another system and have a new label placed on me as I'm trying to get away from this. So it is challenging. The other thing to note is in the last 30 years, we've had a spike in the number of women going to prison by 813%. That is a huge number. Women make up about 10% of the population. But we have to start looking at that. Why are so many women going to prison? And the highest population within that are white-collar women and white women.
So you said earlier that when you were released, you thought your life would be different. How have you been able to reinvent yourself?
Well, I was listening to everyone say that we have to work the process while we're in prison. I actually kind of challenge that just a little bit. I think the time when you know you're going to prison, and if you're home, you need to start that process. You need to start thinking about what can I do differently while I'm in prison. And if you can, and if you have the support system, like I did, I had my family get involved. And I said, these are the things I think I want to do when I come home. These are the type of books I want to read while I'm gone. And I think while you're there, you have to take advantage of the time. And if the government is not going to provide you with the resources, you got to find. Within prison systems, people find each other. We connect. You know, I was in a prison with all women, but I found women who had good stories, had good skills, and women were very community-based. So we would help one another out. We would mentor around GED and other personal issues and so forth. But there's definitely a difference, I think, in men and women in their reentry process.
Ryan, what about you? Same question.
I mean, I do believe there's always going to be a difference. I mean, there's a clear-cut difference between men and women who aren't returning citizens. I think back, I kind of wanted to touch on something Theresa mentioned, and you know, when we come home, it's not only tough to find other people to relate to. By probation, a standard of probation is you're not allowed to associate with anyone with a felony. Sometimes misdemeanors are okay. It depends on what jurisdiction you've been prosecuted in, federal or state. But you know, for instance, I really honestly believe that my probation officer has my best interest at heart. I mean, he really does his job, and as long as I do what I'm supposed to do, we get along great. And I think that the one thing that he did let me do, he let me go towards the organization. He let me go to a nonprofit and find the support there, because that was enough for him to clear it with his boss.
Okay. Well, we'll start our Q&A sessions shortly, but we want the studio audience to be thinking of those questions. First, take a look at this video.
I was sentenced to 87 months. I served a total of 60 months at Alderson Federal Prison Camp in Alderson, West Virginia, the first and oldest prison camp for women. I never imagined the reentry journey to be so difficult. But what has gotten me through this journey has been the women that I met at Alderson. It has been their support. It's been our ability to cry on one another, to encourage one another, to remind one another of all the things that we talked about, of all the things we had imagined while we were in prison. I have 4 sisters, and I love them all dearly, and we're all very close. But when times get tough and I'm trying to figure out how to put my life back on track, I don't give them a call. I call one of my sisters that I met at Alderson, and together we figure out the next steps for one another. People often ask me, how does it feel to be home? And my response normally is, when I'm fully home, I'll let you know.
Well, this is a perfect time for our studio audience to join the conversation. Please step to the mic and give us your name and your question or comment.
Hi, my name is Lauren Hodge, and I am the co-founder of Mission Launch. And I'm just actually curious to hear what everyone's thoughts are on a potential solution. I know we've talked about some of the barriers, and we all are going to come at this from different angles. So I'd love to hear various perspectives.
Okay. Gail?
Well, first of all, we have to stop putting so many people in prison. And there are two announcements that were made in the last month. One is George Soros Foundation has given $30 million to the ACLU to start looking at the issues of why are we putting so many people. They're starting with the state of Georgia, and it's likely to have a ripple effect. And then 2 weeks ago, the MacArthur Foundation said, okay, we'll put up $75 million for communities to apply for $500,000 each to, if the community will get together with the police, the sheriff, the probation people, the drug courts, the mental health people, and work out a system so that when someone comes to trial, to a court, or just even to the prosecution, that there are options other than locking them up. So that would be my first recommendation.
Tony?
My thing would be to attack hiring policies and trying to build bridges with the business community to have them look at individuals on an individual basis, right? To look at the rational relationship between crime and job, and really be able to see people for who they are and not put everybody in a group, you know? That would be my main thing. I think if that happens, then it makes training stronger. It makes education stronger because people can really see light at the end of the tunnel,
So, Tony, are there actual local companies that are participating and hiring ex-offenders?
Well, I think, yes, people hire. You know, if we talking about industry, I would say that construction would probably be the most returning citizen friendly industry. But I think we have such a long way to go. We have returning citizens who want to do things from administration to tech to hospitality to banking to finance to healthcare. And those things a lot of times aren't an option unless you know somebody or somebody can get you in, but it really is limited, especially in the District of Columbia where we have such a knowledge-based job market. We don't have factories, we don't have manufacturing, we don't have shipyards. So people have, and the biggest employer here is the federal government. So I think the federal government indirectly impacts the hiring policies of everybody else in DC. So I'm just trying to paint the picture of what returning citizens coming home are up against.
And educating the business community is just critical.
Sure.
I read a statistic the other day that after 4 years, a former offender is no more likely to reoffend than the average person is to offend.
And I would like to add to here in DC that, you know, Councilmember Kenny McDuffie from Ward 5 pushed through the ban the box legislation. I think it's a great start in where we need to go. I think we need to get to the hiring policies themselves, but I think ban the box and legislation like it across the country.
Briefly describe what that is for those that don't
Well,
know
basically,
what it is.
it's saying that an employer can't inquire about your criminal history until they have made a conditional offer. So it allows a person to hopefully be seen from a skill set perspective and as who they are today before criminal history can be asked about.
Let's go to you, sir. What is your name and what is your question or comment?
Good evening. My name is Al Malik Farrakhan. I'm the founder and executive director of Ceasefire, Don't Smoke the Brothers and Sisters, which is an ex-prisoner, you heard what I said, ex-prisoner organization that gives second chances. We have had one of the greatest rates of helping brothers and sisters come home, over 200 since 1995. We served on the transition team of Myron Barry. He used ex-prisoners on his transition team. That's where the first ex-offender today, what they call returning citizens, came from. Myron Barry put Roach Brown in that position back in 1995. And then you had several mayors that came in that didn't want it, but we kept fighting for it till we have it today. It's sort of watered down the way it is. A lot of us don't use the word returning citizens. And the reason why we don't use it because a citizen is one who enjoy all equal rights and opportunities under the law of the government. And we don't get that when we come home. That's why we're talking about this here right now. So you have many people that use different definitions. Prisons, a #1 commodity. It used to be gold and it used to be oil. Today it is prisons that the brother said and the sister said, if you look at the population and the numbers of how many persons incarcerated, over 2 million, 1,865,000 look just like us. And out of that number, 620,000 are babies from the age of 7 to 28. So what I'm saying, the racism still exists. Under the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, it says slavery nor involuntary servitude shall not be enforced. Only convicted of a crime.
Thank you for your comment. And I think what he's saying is so important because everybody has a different term that they use. He's calling it prisoners, ex-prisoners, ex-prisoners. What do you think about that term? And you know, the logic, returning citizen, not calling them that is, it's pretty interesting because it does make sense because ex-convicts, ex-offenders, ex-prisoners don't have the same rights as
I just throw this
citizens.
out there real quick. Every 5 years, they change the name of what they call us. Every 5 years, right? And it normally comes from government. The returning citizen, young lady says she don't know where it came from. 2006 was started in Texas. And then it, you know, came across the DC and et cetera. The only thing you gotta do is look it up.
Okay. Well, thank you, sir.
Well, I mean, my opinion on, I think it's still the name or whatever it's called, ex-prisoner, ex-offender, ex-con, returning citizen, whatever. I think the premise is the same. People that have a criminal history aren't able to be accepted back into the community in a way that we would like to see. And I think we really have to be able to preach to people. Because this is the thing, where I come from, it's no stigma because everybody there falls into that category, right? But in the rest of, you know, in a lot of other parts of America, that's not normal. You know, and so what happened, we have to educate people. We have to present people that, you don't even know who beside you who may be an ex-offender. We have to get people to understand that making a bad decision does not make you a bad person. And widespread, we have to really have that be the message, that people can make mistakes and people can redeem themselves. This is America.
Lauren, talk about being the daughter of Theresa, somebody that was incarcerated, and how did you deal with your mom being away?
It was a very interesting time. She talks about, or she mentioned earlier, how I graduated college that weekend. Her case started the very next week. It was a very surreal time because for most of my friends, you graduate college and you move home. I graduated in 2006, which was the recession before it was the recession. And we were all trying to figure out why we couldn't get jobs. And most of my friends with undergrads landed at companies like Target and other places because we just couldn't get jobs. So for me, when you asked the question about the financial destroying, it ruined the most important decade potentially of my life. I was 21, I'm now 30, and I have been in a financial tailspin because families go to prison. So when I was graduating and starting out on my own, I couldn't move home and save my first couple of checks and get on my feet. I was constantly paycheck to paycheck. Have been in really bad financial positions ever since because I actually picked up a new bill and my family helped to contribute, but you send money to prisons.
Right.
So it's not free and we all pay. And so for me, it was the beginning to understand that at the end of the day, if I didn't completely rally around my mom, then we would drown together.
And you're working together. Talk about the organization that you guys started together.
What we came to, my mom mentioned this before, is before she actually self-surrendered to Alderson Federal Prison Camp, we sat on my grandmother's couch and I said, well, what do you want to do when you get out? So we started her reentry process before she started. And we had conversations. I was a grad student at Johns Hopkins. I entered a business plan competition. And what we found was 70% of people don't get jobs. So at the end of the day, you must teach entrepreneurship. You must teach freelance business ownership. You must give people a chance, like you said, Gail, to survive because it's in our natural habitat state to survive. So we do entrepreneurship training. We have a fellowship program. We are a software development company, which is new for us, but what we found is prison reentry needs to be more efficient. There are great service providers who oftentimes aren't using the best technology. We're still on a paper system. If you come home, you'll get a piece of paper that says go to these organizations. The paper could be 6 months old, we don't know. So we're really trying to build tech for that. We had a hackathon, and so with criminal ceiling expungement, we have options.
All right, thank you. So in wrapping this up, let me just ask each one of you, what do you want folks to know? What do you want folks to know about you, Theresa, as you re-enter society? What do you want to see happen?
I want people to see me and know that I represent the new normal.
Okay.
I represent not a person who fit the normal stereotype, but I represent a person who's going to prison.
Ryan?
I think for as much as we've discussed the terminology that we prefer to be used in labeling us, I mean, in the end, all that we're really trying to get to is that you call me Ryan.
Okay. Gail?
I want folks to know that there are ways to stay informed and ways to volunteer and ways to contribute. And some people can volunteer, but every organization working with former offenders needs transportation tokens.
Okay. Tony?
Getting this population engaged positively can help from a public safety standpoint. It can help our education system, and especially in impoverished communities, can help rebuild those communities. This is not just about those individuals, it's about their families, it's about their communities. So.
Professor George?
I guess I want our public servants to keep track of the outcomes of our returning citizens across all departments. I want it unified, I want it transparent, and data is what we want.
All right. We're going to have to stop right there. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Please keep the conversation going by tweeting us at WHUT-TV, #PaidTheCrime. Thanks to our guests and panelists, Ryan Ricekamp, Theresa Hodge, Gail Arnell, Tony Lewis, and Edwina Dortch. Also, thanks to our studio audience and to all of you watching at home. I'm Anqoinette Crosby. Until next time, I'll save you a seat.
This program was produced by WHUT, Howard University Television, and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.